So this week's read is just taking forward all the Oscar excitement from the last week. When winning changes the game. Last week, I read a thoughtful piece in The Economist that asked a deceptively simple question. What happens after someone wins an Oscar? Awards night tells a very clear story. An actor walks onto stage, holds the golden statue, thanks the Academy, and joins the small club of Oscar winners. It looks like the peak of a career, the moment where talent is officially recognized and the future opens up. But the article pointed out something interesting. Winning the most famous award in cinema does not always make careers easier. In some cases, it can make them more complicated. Reading it through a behavioral lens reveals why. Beneath the glamour of the award lies a set of psychological forces that quietly shape what happens next. The article describes the outcomes. Behavioral science helps explain the behavior behind them. Why the success stories dominate the narrative. When we think about Oscar winners, a particular kind of story tends to come to mind. We remember the artists whose careers soared after the award, the actors who moved into bigger films, the directors who went on to create even more celebrated work. These examples feel like proof that the Oscars transform everything. The pattern reflects survivorship bias. Survivorship bias occurs when we focus on the visible successes while overlooking the many other cases that do not follow the same path. In the context of the Oscars, the industry and audiences naturally remember the winners whose careers accelerated dramatically. But many winners experience something far more ordinary. Some plateau. Some struggle to find roles that match the moment. Others simply continue a similar trajectory as before. Because the standout success stories are easier to notice and remember, they shape the broader myth that the Oscar always changes everything. The quieter outcome rarely becomes part of the narrative. When the spotlight suddenly feels permanent. Winning an Oscar also changes how visible an artist feels. The moment brings intense global attention. Interviews multiply, media coverage expands, every career move becomes a topic of discussion. This creates a psychological experience known as the spotlight effect. The spotlight effect describes our tendency to overestimate how closely other people are watching and evaluating us. After such a high profile moment, artists may feel that every decision, role, and performance will be scrutinized more closely than before. The perception can make the next step feel unusually risky. Choosing a lighter role, experimenting with a different genre, or taking creative risks can feel harder when it seems like the entire industry is watching. The sense of being permanently under the spotlight can quietly shape the choices that follow. You are only as good as the next performance. The Oscars celebrate a moment in time, a role, a performance, a particular year, but careers are judged continuously. That is where recency bias begins to shape perception. Recency bias is the tendency to give disproportionate weight to the most recent information than the full story of the performance. An Oscar may recognize an extraordinary role, but the industry moves quickly. The next film, the next performance, the next result begins to matter more than the award itself. If the follow-up project succeeds, the Oscar looks like confirmation of sustained brilliance. If the next project struggles, the narrative shifts just as quickly. The conversation stops being about the award and starts being about the latest outcome. In an industry built on constant output, the most recent performance gradually outweighs the most celebrated one. When success raises the bar overnight, winning an Oscar does more than recognize talent. It resets expectations. Expectation bias describes our tendency to judge our outcomes through the lens of what we believe should happen. Once someone has reached the highest level of recognition, people assume that that level should continue. The award becomes the benchmark. Producers expect award-worthy performances. Audiences expect the same emotional intensity. Critics compare each new role to the one that brought the trophy. The difficulty is that creative careers rarely follow such smooth trajectories. Great performances depend on scripts, directors, timings, and sometimes sheer luck. But once expectations rise, even strong performances can feel like a step down simply because they are measured against an extraordinary peak. The Oscar lifts the reputation. It also raises the bar for everything that follows. When the role becomes the identity. Winning an Oscar creates immediate prestige. The artist is suddenly seen through the lens of excellence. This is the halo effect at work. The halo effect occurs when one positive achievement influences how people perceive everything else about a person. The award creates a glow that spreads across the individual's reputation. But over time, the glow can produce an unintended consequence. The very role that created recognition begins to define the artist. Casting directors, producers, and audiences start associating the person with a particular type of character or emotional range. Gradually, the halo effect can flip into a horn effect. Instead of expanding opportunity, that defining role becomes a constraint. The industry struggles to imagine the artist outside that identity, earned through that award. The achievement that elevated them also narrows the frame through which they are seen. When the chase is suddenly over, another subtle shift happens inside the artist. For many performers, the journey towards recognition fuels enormous motivation. Years of auditions, rejections, and small roles create a powerful sense of pursuit. Behavioral science describes this as the goal gradient effect. The goal gradient effect shows that effort increases as people approach a desired outcome. The closer the finish line appears, the harder people push. But crossing the finish line changes the psychology. Winning an Oscar can function as the ultimate professional milestone. The central goal that once structured ambition has been achieved. The chase that powered years of effort is suddenly complete. For some artists, the recognition becomes energizing. For others, it quietly reshapes motivation without the same distant target pulling them forward. The drive that once fueled the work can feel different. Why the glow fades? Holding all these forces together is a broader pattern known as hedonic adaptation. Hedonic adaptation describes how quickly humans adjust to positive outcomes. What initially feels extraordinary gradually becomes normal as people grow accustomed to it. The Oscar moment feels like the peak of recognition. Cameras flash, the world applauds. But over time, the industry adapts. Audiences adapt, and the winner adapts. The achievement becomes part of the background of a career rather than the defining emotional high. Which is what the question raised in the Economist article, which is what makes the Economist article so interesting. Winning an Oscar still brings prestige, visibility, and opportunity. It remains one of the most powerful symbols of artistic recognition. But behavioral science suggests something more nuanced. The statue does not end the story. In many ways, it begins a far more complicated chapter.